Welcome to Trash Talk Reverse. This is Harry, and today we're going to be watching Season 2, Episode 3 of Game of Thrones. Now, I swear this has to be the episode with Catelyn meeting Brienne and Renly. I thought it was the last one, but it wasn't, so it has to be this one. We ended the last episode with Jon getting knocked out by Craster, so I'm sure we'll see the fallout of that either right at the start of this episode or early on in this episode. Another point of interest was Arya finding out Ned was looking into Gendry, so maybe this episode will be introduced to her kill list. I remember at some point she ends up working for Tywin Lannister, but I can't remember how that happens or what season that's in. We'll probably also be back with maybe some more Sansa and Joffrey this episode. And then across the Narrow Sea, we have Dany in what seems to be quite a slowly developing story, which is actually fine. Like I said before, they didn't have much book material to work with, so better to have her just as needed rather than making up some nonsense like they will do later on. Though it remains to be seen how that will play out. So without further ado, let's jump into the episode. I should really stop skipping these because if I'd seen that Michelle Fairley's name was absent from the credits last episode, then I would have known that she's not going to be in that episode. But I'm skipping it anyway. Okay, I was right, so we do pick right back off. Again, good structuring. This is when it would have been appropriate to have that conversation from episode 1 about leadership, learning to follow, etc.
He's killing them, all the boys. You know us as offerings. Offerings? That monster's been the difference between life and death for our rangers. Like it or not, we need men like Craster.
When would Mormont have found this out? Because it wasn't until last season when the Whites came back that any of them sort of even had an inkling. I mean, they had heard things, of course, and they were maybe vaguely concerned, which is why Benjen and the gang kind of went out. But when would Mormont have found out from Craster, oh, I take the baby boys and give them off to the White Walkers in exchange for protection and whatever? He very specifically says offering. Who would the offering be to if not the White Walkers, right? Craster's not leaving the kids out there for other wildlings, so you know that there's White Walkers out there and that Craster's bargaining with them. So if that's something you probably recently found out upon your trip here, because you didn't know before, we've established you didn't know about the White Walkers before, and now you're saying that you know about Craster's offerings and that you understand he does it to survive, wouldn't we, the audience, have benefited from seeing that? Like, it seems like such a weird thing to keep us out of the loop just to surprise Jon with the information that Mormont already knew. I feel like it would have made more sense if Mormont didn't know and he found out just now, like if he found out in the conversation he had with Craster before coming out to Jon, or if Jon had been included in that conversation. I feel like Mormont still could have had the same conclusions, like, it doesn't matter, we still need Craster, he's doing this to survive, like, I get it. So it just logically doesn't make sense for them to be like, oh, I knew all along. Like, no, you didn't.
Don't lose it again.
Interesting metaphor there, I guess. He's not really talking about the sword.
I wanted to give you something. It belonged to my mother. She gave it to me before I left for the wall.
You shouldn't give it away.
I'm giving it to you.
Their bonding happened very quickly, but that's okay because the content of their conversations has been meaningful. Really well done. This is exactly what I was talking about in the first episode. I don't think it would have ruined the impact of this scene at all if they had done a better transition on that scene back in episode 1. If anything, it connects the dots even more.
Not me. I'm running through the Godswood, sniffing the dirt, tasting blood in my mouth when I've made a fresh kill. Story is about magical people.
These are dreams.
No, my dreams are different. Mine are true. I dreamt of my father dying. And Rickon had the same dream.
Okay, so in episode 1, after he woke up from the dream, he and Asha had this kind of meaningless conversation about, oh, you're having those dreams again. I don't dream. It would have been perfectly fine to cut that all out because we have this right here. And this is a much better introduction to Bran's way of processing what these dreams are and that they're not actually dreams than what we had in episode 1. Even though it was short, I still think it was unnecessary. A couple other things to note. One, he's talking about having dreamt about his father dying, and we know that he's gonna like tap into three-eyed raven powers or whatever, but in the last season, Rickon also had that dream. So I'm curious to see how they're gonna explain that. And the second thing is, this power builds nicely from Bran's story so far. He was adventurous in the pilot episode. He was curious about the world. He was like depressed after losing his legs, obviously. And now it's like he's able to walk again in a way and even able to fly. And once again, I'm going to talk about where this story leads because it leads absolutely nowhere. I don't understand why they would put so much time and energy into developing this whole three-eyed raven story and then just have it be nothing.
And what boy doesn't secretly wish for hidden powers? Maybe magic once was a mighty force in the world. The dragons are gone. Children of the forest forgotten.
Now, since we know that dragons are back, obviously it seems to signal that in the grander scope of the story, the magic is slowly going to be reintroduced again, which we know that it is, but for what reason? Again, they're introducing things that end up having no thematic correlation, no point to the larger purpose of the story. What does magic mean in this world? And later on down the line, I can talk more about the magic system in this show, or the lack thereof, I should say, but it's infuriating to see this season setting stuff up that ultimately goes nowhere.
Yield! I yield!
Brienne's character introduction is something I will always remember, but see how they all gasp? It would actually have not been the most shocking thing to see a woman jousting. Like, that was the thing that happened. But this, again, falls in line with a lot of what I've been saying, is that even though they make it seem like this show has a lot of historical inspiration, it's actually not very accurate to a lot of time period norms and things like that, which it doesn't have to be. It could be whatever it wants, but the problem is that it presents itself like it is accurate, and it's not. Like I was saying this in the last episode when Theon looked at Yara and he was like, but she's a woman. You can talk about equality in these types of settings, but please do your research, because otherwise it comes off as super disingenuous. And since a lot of people do think that this show accurately reflects medieval times, even though it is fantasy and in a fictional world, it's just giving off that wrong impression to those viewers and giving them the wrong idea about history altogether.
I swear to you, I will see the Lannisters answer for your husband's murder. When I take King's Landing, I'll bring you Joffrey's head.
I guess you can see in the way they're setting up this episode, with Renly doing really well for himself and having this big team behind him, people rallying, him promising Catelyn that he'll give her Joffrey's head. They're obviously setting it up for the episode when he gets killed, but it is such a waste. And I'll talk about that when we get there.
My lord, your grace. And you should kneel when you approach the king.
No need for that.
My son is fighting a war, not playing at one. It's a game to you, isn't it?
They're trying really hard to make it seem like Renly just has absolutely no shot and that this is basically just a game to him so they can justify killing him. But again, it's a waste. Like, at least let him try. Because otherwise, what's the point of all this if not to waste our time? Because while I do think there's some merit to what Catelyn is saying, sometimes you just need to let the story go a little bit longer to really make a bigger impact.
Fought bravely today, Lady Brienne. I'm no lady.
Again, this whole thing with I'm no lady, Arya said that in season 1 as well, like she's not going to be a lady. We get it, okay? They're not like other girls. I mean, it sounds weird to say it like that because not like other girls is a phenomenon typically used to deal with like YA fiction, when you have like the main female character who's different from other girls because she doesn't like makeup, she doesn't play with dolls, etc. But it still applies here. This feels like whoever wrote this doesn't actually have an idea of what feminism in a historical context or period piece context looks like. Black Sails in the Last Kingdom also have female characters in an environment where it's mostly just men, or in positions that are maybe typically male. And when you watch those shows, the writing of gender dynamics just feels natural and organic. And maybe it's because those shows are set in genuine historical time periods, meaning the writers would have done the extra legwork to actually do that research and learn about the time period instead of simply projecting, which is what this show is doing.
Why didn't you tell me?
I wanted to see who you were first.
Bad excuse. The truth is, y'all want it to be weird. But seriously, Yara could have just hired a girl to do all that and get to know who Theon was. She didn't have to do that herself, because there's no reason she couldn't have gotten like a castle maid or a bar wench or somebody to do that same thing. I guess maybe they thought it has more impact for it to be Yara visually on the screen, but it still gives me the creeps. Also in the last episode, the scene where Theon came up against his dad for the first time since he last saw him, that scene immediately told Balon Greyjoy who Theon was. So again, Yara did not need to be doing all that to know who her brother was. They could have figured out a way around it. They just didn't want to because they wanted to be weird.
Why risk going against the North if they would be our allies? If we pledge fealty to them, they'll give us Casterly Rock.
We take what is ours. Time with the wolves has made you weak.
You act as if I volunteered to go the day you bent the knee to Robert Baratheon. Your last boy! You gave me away like I was some dog you didn't want anymore, and now you curse me because I've come home!
Nah, Theon's right. Would have been so much more satisfying to see Theon fully reject Balon Greyjoy rather than try so hard to fit in. Like, the struggle presented in these few episodes is fine. It's great. It's well done. It makes perfect sense with his character, but where the struggle leads, I guess we'll see how it unfolds because I don't really remember that part, but I've been saying this since last season. I think it would have been so much more satisfying to not have this betrayal arc. But I guess we can't have nice things in the show because it's just about people doing bad things all the time. I just want to take this quick moment to point out, even though there are no transitions in this episode so far that stand out as really good, there's also none that stand out as really bad. These transitions are normal. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them. They're not doing anything fancy. They're just cutting from one scene to the next and it feels fine. Like, the flow of the story feels organic and this is what it should look like. Cool transitions every now and then are great, but as long as we don't have transitions that are bad enough that they take you out of the story, that's perfectly fine. And so I think this episode so far has been a good example that you don't need super fancy transitions in order to elevate the episode or anything. You can just have an episode with normal transitions, cutting from scene to scene that maybe don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, cutting between shots that maybe don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. All of that is fine as long as it's just well edited and it makes sense. So props to this episode, because for once I feel like I'm not noticing any issues with the transitions.
We've come to a dangerous place. My sister wants to hurt me. She'll look for any weakness she can find.
I'm the weakness. How is being a weakness a compliment?
Language can be a bit tricky.
I am not kitchen wench.
I didn't like how that conversation ended. Like, Tyrion was making sense, and then what could have been resolved very easily by him saying, the reason you're a weakness is because you're someone that's close to me, someone that I care about, and my sister is constantly looking for those types of connections in my life to exploit. 2 sentences, dude. I see this happen enough in movies and shows to notice it. Sometimes they'll have this type of scene where one character is trying to explain something to the other, and then they don't finish the explanation, and this is a thing that happens often enough for me to notice, so I'm just like, what is the logic behind that? Just to be cryptic and weird?
But yours will be Ivory, since you're the bride. Princess just spoke to you.
I'm counting the days until the fighting's done, and I can pledge my love to the king in sight of the gods.
This right here was exactly what I wanted to see in that first episode. The way it's filmed and the way it's directed, even the way it's edited and written, just giving us enough of a pause to show what Sansa's going through. And then the bonus of having Cersei kind of get what Sansa's going through. She doesn't have to say anything. You can just tell that she kind of understands through the angles and the editing and the whole direction of that scene. So great job there.
I shouldn't have to tell you to do things, you should just do them. Well, I don't know how they did things in that city, but in this city, handmaidens wait on ladies, not the other way around. And I don't have time to answer 1,000 questions and teach you how to do your job.
I think this was a really great way of showing what Sansa's going through without having to tell us. She's taking out her frustration on someone she can have control over, and she's doing it in a way that makes sense with the character because Sansa's obviously used to being a lady and used to this way of life. And so if this was last season, it could have come across as rude and bratty. And it's not like it's the most complicated scene or anything to write. I mean, they're literally just showing how difficult situations like the one she's in right now is affecting the way she's acting. That's really all it takes. She doesn't have to like sit down and talk to Shay about what she's going through. She doesn't have to talk to anyone about what she's going through for us as the viewers to know. And I wish I saw this type of character building more in this show where they're revealing the character and what they're going through via their actions.
I haven't had a proper shit in 6 days.
Is this the episode where he tells Pycell, Littlefinger, and Varys 3 different things about where he's sending Myrcella? Because at the beginning of the episode, I honestly wanted to say I thought this might be the episode, but after completely getting the Renly and Brienne thing wrong about the last episode, I was like, well, let me shut my mouth and just watch the damn episode.
I'm trusting the council with these plans, but the queen mustn't know.
Now, it might not be obvious at first glance, but the way this scene builds on Tyrion's previous scene with Shay is actually well done. And again, they don't need to be explicit about these things. It's just implicit that Tyrion is worried about who he can trust in this castle, especially with last episode, Varys finding out about Shay, and then him getting rid of Janos Slynt because he doesn't listen to Tyrion. And then in this episode, him having a conversation with Shay, basically being like, I don't know who to trust. My sister can basically use you against me. And that leads nicely into this, where he's sort of weeding out the people he can't trust. The through line doesn't have to be obvious. It doesn't have to be in your face. It's just there and it makes sense in the back of your mind and it works. I feel like they're doing a lot of things really well this season. Still some stuff that they're not doing well, but every episode I've seen so far this season, there has been so much to point out about the good things that this show is doing, which is great.
But remember, queen mustn't know.
Ooh, queen mustn't know.
Just the way Varys said that, like he definitely knows Tyrion is testing him.
Plan to marry Princess Myrcella off to Theon Greyjoy.
The look in his face.
Theon's father loathes the Starks. Greyjoy can destroy the Northern Army from within, and we can have his father's ships.
I feel like he should have given Varys a more reasonable example than Theon Greyjoy. I feel like already when Tyrion said, you can't tell the queen, Varys knew what Tyrion was doing. But the example of Theon Greyjoy, you could just see on Varys' face, he was like, what are you talking about, dude?
Plan to wed Princess Myrcella to rub an errand of the veil. Lysa is not fond of me. She tried to execute you. Holding grudges can be an encumbrance, don't you think? You want me to broker this agreement?
I understand why he chose Robin Arryn, because Littlefinger knew the two sisters growing up, so he has a personal relationship with them. But I feel like for Tyrion's case, it would have been more effective if he had used 2 random people from 2 random houses that we hadn't heard of yet, like he did with Pycell and Martell. That would have been a stronger test. And even though I know for a fact Varys and Littlefinger would not have broken in those instances either, it's just a tiny little detail that would have made Tyrion's test stronger. However, Tyrion suggesting Theon Greyjoy was worth it enough to see the look on Varys' face, so I can totally forgive this.
With a single stroke, you'd make me one of the greatest lords in the realm.
You served my family well.
So did Janos Slynt.
I need you to deliver Lysa Arryn. I didn't need Janos Slynt.
I think while Varys was definitely on to Tyrion, Littlefinger there might have been a bit of doubt in his mind. Not that he's gonna go tell Cersei anyway, but just from the performance that he gave, gives me the vibe that he didn't know what Tyrion was up to. So in that case, what I said earlier about him picking random people, like the Martells, it still would have been interesting to see Tyrion try this with 3 completely random people to engage Myrcella to, but given that Tyrion suggesting Theon was funny, and Tyrion has sold his case enough to make Littlefinger believe he's being genuine based on the performance by the actor, I would say, yeah, I'm totally cool with what happened here. This is something to keep in mind when analyzing a TV show. Sometimes you'll come across stuff that you're like, could this have been better written? Yeah. Could this have been changed to have this effect? Yeah. Do I really care though? No. And this is one of those moments where it literally does not matter. I'm perfectly happy with the scene we got, and I think it would have been interesting if they had done it this other way, but it doesn't matter. So we move on. So just keep this in mind. Like, you can think critically about a TV show or a movie without having that actually affect your enjoyment of what you're watching. I kind of touched on this in my Maze Runner video. If you've seen those movies, I criticized the story of the second and third, but I still really liked the series overall, and it did not affect my enjoyment at all. The problems there were way bigger than the scene that I just talked about, but still a good example for the point that I'm trying to make, which is basically use your head when it comes to thinking about the things you're criticizing. Sometimes, yes, things can be improved, and that would be great if they did. Sometimes they matter on a big scale, sometimes they matter on a small scale. Sometimes, yes, they could be improved, but it's not the biggest deal in the world, like when I talk about transitions and things like that. And then there are scenes like this, where it literally does not matter, but you can still be analytical about that. They did a good job with this. Like, he looks so uncomfortable and just physically like he does not want to do this. I think that's a great thing to showcase in his story.
Your enemies aren't happy about us. They want to tear us apart. You decide how you want to do it. With me and Loris, however else you like.
It's great that she's being so supportive. And again, this whole scene is really nice. Just thinking about the political machinations of everything that's going on and how they're going to navigate this, it once again feels like a massive waste to have him killed off so soon. Like, y'all really didn't give his story enough time to marinate.
She'll be a hostage.
A guest.
When she said you'll be a hostage, he should have said, like Sansa Stark. Again, in his storyline, I think this decision for him at this moment is appropriate. This is him giving into the weakness, and it feels organic, and that's great. The betrayal, on the other hand, again, I'll talk about that when we get there, but really was not a fan.
It was Varys. I told Varys to the Greyjoys, Littlefinger to Robb to Dornish. I told no one but you.
Tyrion didn't need to spell all that out for us. He could have just said, you're the only person I told I was shipping Myrcella off to Dorne. But again, this is one of those moments where it really doesn't matter. And you can even say Tyrion told him the whole story because he's kind of like, gotcha.
And it seems the Grand Maester has found his way into a black cell.
Again, this is something that's very implicit, but I just find it fascinating that of the three people he went to, Pycell is the one that snitched, Littlefinger is the one that thought he was being genuine but kept the secret, and Varys is the one who saw right through him right away. It's just really well done. It's an excellent way to establish Tyrion's ongoing relationship with Varys after what happened in the last episode where there was basically some possible mistrust between them, and knowing that Varys will eventually end up freeing Tyrion and taking him to Dany. This is like a great little notch in their journey.
3 great men sit in a room, a king, a priest, and a rich man. Each great man bids the sellsword kill the other 2. Who lives? Who dies?
Depends on the sellsword.
But if it's swordsmen who rule, why do we pretend kings hold all the power?
I've decided I don't like riddles.
Power resides where men believe it resides. It's a trick, a shadow on the wall. A very small man can cast a very large shadow.
Love this so much. And I like Varys' idea about power a lot more than Cersei's power is power line, because that just felt really flat to me, as I told y'all in episode 1. I understand her thinking behind it, and again, it really just has to do with the line itself. It makes sense for Cersei to believe that being in charge is the crux of power, even though she obviously utilizes knowledge as well. And so that didn't really work for me in that scene. But in this scene, the way Varys explains the concept of power and the exact dialogue he uses, just perfect. Perfectly done. If there is one thing that bothered me though, it's that Tyrion didn't follow Varys' train of thought. I think Tyrion's intellect has been established enough that we should believe that he should be able to keep up with Varys and what he's talking about. So for him to be like, I don't like riddles, doesn't really work, because even though he can disagree with Varys at first, I see him still being able to follow Varys' train of thought. But again, this is one of those moments that really doesn't matter, and I can see that they put it in basically just to get through the scene, and I'm okay with that. Again, when you're analyzing media, you have to be like, okay, if I see this problem and this problem, what's gonna bother you and what's not gonna bother you? What problems are you not okay with? But anyway, this was another great scene. I should also say, this just reminds me again that this season is so much better at juggling the various storylines than last season was. I feel like we're getting just the right amount of every single storyline and character to where it doesn't feel bloated. It also doesn't feel skimpy. It feels just right.
How do you sleep when you have those things in your head?
You didn't see that. I made damn sure.
I close my eyes and I see them up there.
I'm glad they're having this conversation.
Where I would say his name every night before I went to bed, Willem.
Hey, I guess I got that one right as well. Her learning about making the list this episode. Poor kid, they're gonna get him.
Come here, High! Keep High! Help us! Help us, High!
Help! Help me! Can you walk? You gotta carry me.
That felt a little weird. They made it seem like because he took Gendry's helmet, they were gonna think that he was the guy that they were looking for, Robert Baratheon's bastard, and take him out that way. So don't love how this happened, but the rest of the scene was great. Having Arya and the Jack and Hagar stuff coming in the middle just had a really organic flow to it, and it didn't have us concentrating on the battle itself for too long. It mixed things up and made things interesting, and the look on Jack and Hagar's face, like he's definitely gonna remember Arya, so that's something they're setting up to come back later. Also, I said in the intro of this episode, I wasn't sure when Arya was gonna go to Tywin Lannister, but I guess that's happening right now.
We're looking for a bastard named Gendry.
You want Gendry? You already got him. He loved that helmet.
So I guess the setup of the helmet did have a payoff, but just in a really weird way. Maybe they did it like this to show Arya using her brains, stepping in, defending Gendry, whatever, but it still doesn't feel super impactful to have it done this way, as opposed to if they had found the other guy and thought he was Gendry, and maybe the real Gendry and Arya see that, and they let it happen anyway, because then it dives into the morality of the situation. Here, it's more like, oh, this kid already died, I can use him as a scapegoat to protect Gendry, and it's not that big of a deal. Whereas if it was the other way around, where they were targeting this kid because he had the helmet and Arya and Gendry chose not to say anything, then it would have been like, oh, they're making this choice to survive, and it would have been a more difficult decision, and it would have weighed heavier on them both because they basically just let this innocent kid die. But anyway, that's a wrap on this episode. I'm curious to see how the Renly storyline further develops, because what we got from this episode was good to build on, but if he's getting killed at the end of the next episode, then clearly there's not a lot that they can do with this. Like, I would have much preferred to see Renly and Robb team up and embark on some endeavor at least before Renly dies, because otherwise it feels like a waste, like I've been saying probably 10 times already. But again, I'm gonna keep my full thoughts until I actually see it play out, because maybe I'm just not remembering right, and there is significant development up until that point that makes it feel like it's not a waste to kill Renly in that moment, so I'll hold off on that for now. But there's still plenty to talk about for this episode. We didn't see Dany at all during this episode, which is fine, because like I said, I'd rather her not be in the episode than have them make something up that doesn't make any sense. I also think overall this episode was better than the last, even though the last episode had some really standout scenes. It also had a couple bad scenes, which this episode didn't have at all. It's probably the best episode of the whole show so far, though to be fair, the past 2 episodes were better than everything we got in season 1. So we'll see if the rest of the season can top this one. I didn't expect Arya to move on to Tywin Lannister this quickly. I guess my memory is better than I gave it credit for, because I had an inkling that it would be in this season, but I just wasn't sure. The pacing of this season is excellent so far. We have a lot going on. There's a lot of character development in conjunction with plot progression. We're even getting a bit more into the theme of power, which I don't know how much more that'll be explored in the show beyond what we've got so far. It's obviously the main topic of the whole King's Landing part of the show, but I don't recall the topic getting too much depth in later seasons. But Varys in this episode gave us a nice dimension that we haven't seen before in this show. I wonder what else this season has in store, because I'm really just blanking on everything except Blackwater, Renly's death, and the Dany stuff, but maybe I'll remember more as we get further into the story. So let me sign off, and I'll see you in the next one.